I invite folks, there are seats here in the front, and we welcome you up front if you are so inclined. My name is Sarah Davis. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the director of the Children and Families Division at the Hennepin County Attorney's Office. Thank you all so much for being here today. I want to start by thanking our co-sponsors, the University of Minnesota Law School and the University of St. Thomas School of Law. We will have some folks from those law schools here with us today, and we're really grateful for their co-sponsorship of this event. I also want to start us off by welcoming our leaders from the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention who have joined us here from Washington, D.C. this morning. We have Administrator Liz Ryan and Senior Policy Advisor Naomi Smoot right here in the front row. And we are so lucky to have them here. These folks are longtime leaders in the field of youth justice, national experts. I can't overstate how lucky we are to have them here, and I hope you'll find time to connect with them on breaks, and you'll hear from Liz today, both as a facilitator, a keynote, and as a panelist. We also expect and have some elected officials here with us today. I know I saw Representative Sandra Feist is here. We have Jen Westmoreland from the Hopkins School Board. If I've missed, we have Mary Moriarty, of course, here. If I've missed anybody, I apologize. This is not my strong suit. But we will have local, county, and state leaders with us here today, and we appreciate them joining us for this time. Today is really about having critical conversations about youth justice and tackling the hard questions. We're not going to just stay on the surface. We really want to dig in and talk about the issues that are most important in our youth justice system today. We will be engaging important leaders and voices through our panels. We've got local, state, and federal policymakers, community leaders, researchers, and most importantly, people with lived experience in this system. Our goal today is serious, in-depth dialogue about how we can improve youth outcomes and community safety in the context of our youth justice system. And we are going to center racial equity in our conversations today. You cannot talk about youth justice in Minnesota without talking about race. We have some of the worst racial disparities in the country as it relates to our youth justice system. And we have to center that in our conversations if we're going to talk about how we move forward. I want to thank our panelists. You'll have their bios in the program if you picked it up. We also have a QR code where you can download their bios. We have incredible leaders, and I'm grateful to each of them for being here today. I also want to thank you all for being here today because today is about dialogue. We are having space within each of our panels for questions from our audience. There will be a QR code on the screen, and if you have a question and you can't use a QR code, you're not sure how to do that or your phone's not capable of that, just raise your hand and we'll have somebody come by and get your question from you. A couple of quick logistics. We're here in this beautiful space, open book, and encourage you to explore the space on your breaks. The bathrooms are past the elevators, and there's also water fountains down there, and we do have some water bottles for folks who need it. We are providing lunches today. They're going to be boxed lunches. Folks, if you requested a special type of meal, we have that. So if you requested a halal meal, please find one of our staff. We have specific boxes of meals for that. If you requested vegetarian, there will be options for that out there as well. If you have questions, feel free to find me. I'm going to be here all day. And then lastly, we have applied for CLE credits for this, and so we do have a code. It will be up on the screen. If you're a lawyer and you're seeking CLE credits, we have to get your bar number. So if you didn't give us your bar number on the way in, please stop at the registration table at some point today so we can get your bar number so you can get those CLE credits. So now I have the distinct honor and pleasure of introducing my boss, Hennepin County Attorney Mary Moriarty. Mary has just completed her first term in office here as Hennepin County Attorney, and youth justice has been a major priority from day one. I'm deeply honored and grateful to lead with her in this work, to ask the hard questions, to do the hard work. And Mary is a courageous leader in this area, and I'm thrilled to have her here this morning to talk with you a bit about our priorities and her vision for this work. Thank you. I don't think that goes in there. I'm not sure. I don't know if it fits in here. We also have. Okay, there's also this.
Welcome. I am so excited to see all of you here. We're here to talk about why youth justice matters. And my answer to that is very different now than it would have been when I was campaigning or starting off my first year. I knew youth justice mattered, but I didn't quite realize the nuance, the intensity of the reaction of what we wanted to do and what we have done. And I've learned a great deal, a lot of that from Sarah Davis. And I want to thank Sarah. She's the head of our Children and Family Division. She put this together. She's been a guiding force for me in really thinking about these hard issues. So thank you, Sarah. So when I think about youth, I used to think, and how many of you are familiar with We Are All Criminals? Emily Baxter's work, most of you, right? So I went through a phase where I was kind of like, well, sure on some minor things, but no, I could never have been in that position of doing some of the things that I see. And it took me a long time to figure out, well, actually I could have. But the reason I didn't was because of a combination of genetics or environment, racial privilege, all kinds of things. Because as a child, I experienced a lot of trauma, as many of you have, right? But because, as I said, genetics, privilege, I did grow up in a system of systemic racism, but it didn't impact me in the way it impacts many of our youth. And so I recognize I could have gone down the path that many of our youth went down, if not for some fortunate whatever it was that led me into a course of perfectionism and that kind of thing. So youth justice matters. When I look at, and actually I should go back to when I was a public defender. I was a public defender for about 30 years. And I remember talking to my clients, asking them about their history, their social history, because I wanted to find out how they got to this place. And it was trauma after trauma. It was foster care. It was abuse. It was parents with drug addiction. It was just trauma. And I remember thinking, this person probably wouldn't be here sitting next to me if we had effectively intervened as a community early on in this person's life. And I always thought that, but then when I came and I was elected county attorney, I now know it. I look at reports, for instance, when a youth comes in and we're looking at whether, just reports about this youth. What I often see, what's really heartbreaking, is I will look at the history of this child, right? The history of this child. And this is usually when we get a certification study or something like that. You look at the history of the child and it says failed. Failed programming, failed this. And I always think, was it the child that failed the program, or was it us that failed this child? And it's very clear to me we are failing our youth, particularly our Black and brown youth. They grow up in a system of systemic racism. They grow up with tremendous trauma in their lives, in their communities, and we are not helping them. And we aren't, as I've learned this past year, really actually looking at it through an appropriate lens. And that's what I'm really excited about to be able to talk about today. What is the connection between youth justice outcomes and community safety? I've had a firsthand look to that. When we are not appropriately intervening and supporting our youth, they, because they are kids, are engaging in some behaviors that can be very dangerous to them and to our community. For instance, stealing cars and driving in a reckless way. We've seen a number of youth that have been killed in those accidents and have killed and injured other people. we see if a youth experiences trauma and they don't get that help and they get sucked into the system, if it isn't helpful, if it isn't rehabilitative, if it isn't effective, they may very well continue down that path of escalating behavior. And that's harmful not only to that youth, that young person, but to their family and to the community. Think of the kids who are left behind when we send people to prison. Think of the families that are left behind that have a hard time supporting themselves. It's community trauma as well. And that is why effective approaches to youth is so incredibly critical to not only our community safety, but our community health. Because I think we need to start looking at this as public health. So what does this look like? We are at the County Attorney's Office engaging in a positive youth development framework. And what does that mean? It means that we engage in community-based restorative justice for youth. It's the idea that we look at a youth's positives, their strengths, and their family's strengths, not the negatives. And we try to support them in that positive behavior. We want victims to participate and to listen to their needs and wants as well. We want to create an environment where a person who has caused harm can begin to repair that harm, and the person who's been harmed feels as though they are on a path for healing. We want to build pathways for employment opportunities for youth, because that can be critical. And it's not, I'm tired of hearing, there are all kinds of jobs out there. Well, sure, there are some kinds of jobs, but is a job making minimum wage really going to enable a person to thrive or survive or to support their families? So yes, there are jobs, but we need to do a much better job of creating career pathways. We want to craft resolutions to cases that will allow youth to build on their strengths and address concerns so that they do not return to the system. If youth are going to come into the system, shouldn't our goal be to support them, rehabilitate them in a way that's safe to the community, but so that they don't come back to the system? We should hope that we help them achieve and thrive so that they don't come back and their behavior doesn't escalate. So we know with youth, interventions with young people are effective when they are immediate, so close in time to the behavior. And this is a key to some of the things we've been doing in our youth prosecution unit. You cannot have a youth engaging in some kind of behavior on a particular date, and then they get charged 6 weeks, 2 months later, and then it's months and months and months after that before there is some kind of accountability. We know that youth are accountable to relationships, not rules. Telling a youth, here are your rules, just isn't gonna fly. It is about relationships. It's building those relationships. That's what youth and all of us are more accountable. I mean, what do we care about disappointing a rule, right? We care about our relationships. We care when we know that people care about us. Individualized. We can't have cookie cutter approaches for youth. We have to account for the individualized strengths and needs of each youth and family. And it's got to be community-based, connected to the youth and the family's community. This is an issue when the only available help for a youth is not in their community. They may go and thrive someplace, and for instance, most of you probably know that one of the programs Hennepin County contracts with is in Utah, right? So you send a youth to Utah, they may thrive in that environment because they may build relationships with the people providing them with therapeutic help. But what happens when they get back to their community? Where is that support system? That's one of the reasons why it's so critical to have those support systems, those relationships that help here in community. So how have we put all of this into practice this past year? Sarah mentioned we created Children and Families Division. So we have all things youth and family related in one division, and Sarah is the director of that division. For instance, we don't want child protection over here and youth prosecution over here. We put everything under one umbrella because we know we cannot continue to work in these silos. These are the same youth, the same families, and we need to connect all of those dots. We have established a new youth auto theft early intervention initiative. And what that is this is, we have a couple of slides on it. So here's what we were hearing. So when a youth commits a crime, or anybody commits a crime, let's say it's a car theft, to bring a case to us, law enforcement has to be able to identify the person or the people and have enough evidence for us to be able to proceed. We are finding that, for instance, on auto theft in Hennepin County, the rates at which we get cases is about 2%. Okay, 2% across Hennepin County. So when you go back to accountability, there are many people who are taking cars who are not held accountable. There are many reasons that that's happening, and we can talk about that in a separate way. But the reality is, the people engaging in this conduct, a lot of youth are not getting caught, and so there's no way for accountability, right? So we were hearing that from police partners across Hennepin County. What we also knew was that police were saying to us, we know which kids are at risk here. We know that they're out there, they're not in school, they may be in a car that was stolen and running away, and we're seeing them over and over, but we just don't have enough to bring you a case. So Sarah and her team created a new pathway. That new pathway is out of the system. The new pathway was designed to keep youth out of the system. It was designed to give them and their families voluntary services. I got asked a question about this once recently about, well, we don't think this is appropriate for people who are carjacking. This isn't that, okay? This is voluntary services for youth and families. And we know that there are a lot of youth out there who are at risk. We know a lot of youth and families are struggling with mental health. So how do we help? How do we intervene, knowing that there isn't a case there, and frankly, not really wanting a case to exist? We don't want to bring youth into the system. So what we did was meet with many months over with law enforcement, and we said, we'll meet with you as often as you want to. Tell us, or pick up the phone and call us, tell us the names of youth that you feel are at risk. This is not, by the way, a two-way street. So we assembled youth prosecution, child protection, and because of privacy, data privacy stuff, what child protection knows can't even be shared with our youth prosecution. So it wasn't a sharing that way. We also brought in our social worker from our truancy intervention, Be at School, and we started this at the end of June. And so we would get information. It was not for the purpose of opening new child protection cases or getting the family into the system. In fact, our goal was the opposite. So this is the data, this is the data on the program. So what would happen is we would get the names, we would screen the child to see if they were actually involved in a county. So if they had an open child protection case, we could communicate with that caseworker and say, hey, this kid's on the radar here. But if they weren't, and that's what we're talking here, 82 youth were referred to a social worker for services out of the people that were screened, and I think that was the slide before, was it that? Okay, so 154 young people were referred to the initiative. 82 met the eligibility criteria and were referred to services from a social worker. So that meant 82 of them were not already part of the system. And what was really wonderful, I thought, was when our social worker reached out to them, when he was able to reach the families, which was actually about 96% of the time, the family said two things. We're not surprised you're reaching out to us, and thank you. We didn't know what to do. That says a lot, right? Not a surprise, but we didn't know what to do. Thank you. So we go to the next slide. 82 were referred. 72 of those 82 had no new charge cases since the date of referral to services. That's 88%. 9 young people had a new charged case after the date of referral. Those of you who work a lot with youth know how important this is. I see you, like, yeah, right? We know actually from data that when we talked to the Sheriff's Intelligence Department, CISA, they are tracking the date at which youth start to engage in risky behavior and how quickly it escalates into like violent guns, that kind of thing. That time frame is getting a lot narrower, a lot shorter. So to have 72 of those 82 young people have no new referrals is huge. That's 72 young people who aren't coming into the system. That's 72 young people and their families who receive the services that were on the slide before, and we'll make these slides available, by the way. That's how we approach, that's how we support youth and families to keep them from coming into the system. So we also have community-based youth diversion. We do that both pre-charging, post-charging. We've referred 1,230 cases to youth diversion. Of those completed, although some are still pending, 74% are successful. So 74% of the youth that we refer to diversion are successful. That means they've had contact with the system once, and the services that they received have helped them not come back into the system. So that's, there are these myths out there about youth engaging in horrible crimes and repeat offenders, and there are a tiny percentage of youth that fit that category. But most of them, as you can see, when they get the needed services, they don't come back. So we have also reduced delinquency system entry for our youngest children. And by youngest children, I'm talking about 10 to 12. It's really painful to see that we have 10-year-olds, 11, 12-year-olds engaging in behavior that's bringing them to the attention of police or other people. But it's not a great path to bring them into the delinquency, or we call it youth prosecution, but prosecute. Why do we want to prosecute 10, 11, 12-year-olds? You can make that argument about 13, you can go on and on and on. But those youth are very often legally incompetent to really assist in their defense anyway. So that route isn't really effective and doesn't really work. So we have been able to reduce the entry for those youth and increased collaboration with community and system partners to provide effective interventions outside the justice system. Finally, or maybe not finally, but next, we are reducing youth certification. So I know we have Administrator Ryan here who's probably going to talk a little bit about their position about youth certification. Youth certification is treating a youth as an adult and sending them to adult prison at times. Many of you are aware that we are one of the very few Western countries and very few countries that actually sends kids to adult prison, meaning under 18. And 18, by the way, as most of you know, is simply an artificial, arbitrary, legal number. It has no relationship to the youth, brain development, any of that, none of that. So it's an arbitrary number, and we have in the past, and in this country we do, send kids to adult prison. And we know the outcomes there are terrible. And because they're youth, they're teenagers, when they go into prison, they are going to get out. And so it's important to us to look at, we know the outcomes. If they're going to go to prison, which is incredibly traumatizing, and they're going to get out at a fairly young age, how are they going to be when they get out? Because we also know re-entry help is not, people are trying, but it's not really there. We also know that our prisons weren't designed to help people reintegrate into the community. If they were, people would be allowed to have names and not be referred to as inmate and numbers. People would be able to wear their own clothes. They'd be able to feel safe in prison. They'd be able to learn whatever they wanted to learn, trades and that kind of thing. So our prisons are not designed to help anyone return successfully into the community, and certainly not for young people. So this is just a chart of what we have done in 2023. Unfortunately, we have, and this is heartbreaking, we have had cases where we have certified youth, and that's, I think, 5 here, right? From 44 before I came into office that other year. So we have agreed to certify adults, and it's very painful. Part of it comes from a lot of who we're talking about are 17-year-olds. We have very limited ability to help them. They have histories, extensive histories. And so we're hoping that the legislature will help us. I'm looking at Representative Feist over there. Increasing the age that we can have jurisdiction over youth so we don't have to certify them. And also the kinds of services we'll be talking about today that will help youth in the community. So we're very proud of the fact that we have dramatically lessened the certifications. So one of 3, so we were, and Sarah's gonna get a big shout out, I know she hates the attention. We were one of 3 jurisdictions in the entire country awarded federal funding this year for a 3-year grant focused on juvenile justice system reform and reinvestment from the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. So a huge shout out. Our commitment this coming year and the rest of however long I am in office is to improve community safety and well-being through both individual and system accountability that leads to positive outcomes for youth, families, and communities. I'm really excited about today. This is the beginning of a new conversation that we desperately need to have here in Minnesota, and thank you for being here.